Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast series brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I'm Raghaw Khattri, Research Analyst at ISAS, and I will be your host for today's episode. In April 2025, a deadly terror attack in Pahalgam, Kashmir led to a sharp escalation between India and Pakistan, with India suspending the Indus Waters Treaty in response. This was followed by Operation Sindoor, a series of Indian military strikes that India describes as having targeted militant sites in Pakistan. Today, tensions remain high, with both countries locked in a cycle of military and diplomatic confrontation. To discuss this, we have with us Professor C Raja Mohan, visiting research professor at ISAS. Professor Mohan is one of India's leading commentators on Indian foreign policy. He writes a regular column for the Indian Express and is also on the editorial boards of a number of Indian and international journals on world politics. Welcome, Professor Mohan.
Thank you, Raghav. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Professor Mohan, let's dive into our questions. S- Firstly, what are the immediate and potential long-term risks of escalation between two nuclear-armed states following these strikes?
I think ever since Pakistan and India acquired nuclear weapons, Pakistan acquired them in the late 80s, and India demonstrated its capabilities. Both countries demonstrated their capabilities publicly in the 1990s. Now, I think since then, every military crisis between the two countries has the potential to escalate. And this is one reason why we had repeated efforts by the international community to dampen the escalation. So I think it is given the nature of the persistent conflict between India and Pakistan, the fact that both of them have strong armies, and the fact that both of them have nuclear weapons. So the danger of escalation has been real, I think, for nearly, I would say, almost 4 decades. So managing this has become a problem, not just for India and Pakistan, but preventing escalation has also been a challenge for the international community. And what is different in the current crisis is this. In the past, I think after initial exchange of blows, military blows, the crisis was brought to a termination with some understanding, with some accommodation or otherwise. But this time around, we are seeing actually tit-for-tat moves that are beginning to create movement up the escalation ladder. First, the terror incident you mentioned. Then you had the Indian strikes on Pakistani terror targets, terror infrastructure. And then you had the Pakistani response to attack some of the military bases in northwest India. And then the Indian response of sending drones and other stuff into the Pakistani airspace. And then Pakistan responded with its own, drone strikes into India. All this has taken place. The last few steps, that is India's response to Pakistan's terror and Pakistan's reaction, India's reaction and counter-reaction. Today, I think all these have taken place in a very short period, barely 36 hours. So I think this is going to be watched very carefully by both sides as well as the international community to see how this can be tempered down.
All right, just a follow-up question for that. What is your sense on how far is India willing to go?
In fact, India is making it very clear that look, as long as there is India feels the victim, and if Pakistan keeps responding with military actions, both the Indian External Affairs Minister, Mr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, has made it clear, as long as there is military action and escalation from Pakistan, India will continue to respond. So I think they're quite the decisions, for example, in India, of undertake civil defense measures, of calling the entire government to prepare for long-term conflict. All this suggests this time India is not going to simply walk away. In the past, as I mentioned, that a couple of blows and then India would be step back. And you had the same cycle again after some time, one more terror incident, one more Indian response. So this time India is saying very clearly that they're not going to simply go back without some kind of they've not said it in so many words, unless there's something more concrete in terms of the terror infrastructure on Pakistan. So I think India's approach this time is very, very different from the approach of Delhi to the previous crisis.
Yeah, all right. Moving on, in what ways do you think Operation Sindoor is different from the previous Indian responses, such as the 2016 and 2019 strikes? And what is the signal being sent by India by targeting sites in Punjab, Pakistan?
Yeah, I mean, in 2016, there was really land incursion by the Indian armed forces to deal with some terror camps. So it was a shallow penetration into the Pakistani territory. And in 2019, there were attacks on Pakistan occupied Kashmir and a place that was just beyond in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region. So this time, as you mentioned, I mean, I think India has gone for the well-known terror infrastructure in Muridke and in Bahawalpur, which are really part of Punjab, as well as Sialkot. So I think the focus, the decision to go beyond POK is a new from the Indian perspective that they're basically saying, look, India is not afraid of escalation. India is going to reach out to the terror targets wherever they are, and India is not going to self-deter itself, given the scale of the challenge it faces.
All right, and how has the international community, including major powers like China, France, the United States, responded to this escalation? And in particular, how do you read President Trump's statement describing both India and Pakistan as friends?
Look, I think, yeah, in some sense, what Trump said captures it. Look, I think most countries are asking India and Pakistan to restrain themselves. Now, there is from the Indian perspective, I mean, there is a concern that look, there's no attempt at differentiating the specific, that India is a victim of terror and Pakistan as a sponsor of terror. So therefore, they see this as actually, A and B, both of you should restrain. But this is quite normal in international politics. Most countries react to conflict between other countries by calling for restraint by both sides. So I would say, barring China to some extent and Turkey, which is kind of more directly supporting Pakistan, there has been most of India's partners have actually taken a more neutralist position, which is say, look, India and Pakistan are friends. This should not escalate to a regional level. Therefore, find a way to talk to each other and resolve this problem. So that's been the general tone of all the interventions. But there I must say that much of the world was very sympathetic to India and shared the sorrow with India on the terror attacks. That doesn't mean they automatically kind of say, look, India has a right to self-defense, therefore, they're going to support India's military actions. Some of them might say it privately, but you're not going to get that explicitly in the public domain, that India is free to do what it wants. So I think it's for India, India is not going to go by the formal statements. India knows that many of these formal statements are really pro forma, and all countries have to say it. Recall, India said much the same thing between Ukraine and Russia when they were fighting. But so I think the challenge for India is to decide how much space does this offer, not in terms of what actually they've said in the statements, but in terms of its partnerships and relationships. What is the space for military action, and how much further can India go? That's a political judgment. That is a judgment based on India's assessment of the state of play in the international relations, etc.
All right, Prof. Mohan, I have a couple of follow-up questions to your response. I mean, you mentioned China, I mean, is seen to be more actively on the Pakistani side per se. How do you read China's positioning on this issue?
Look, I think in all these crises, I mean, China has, I mean, given the special relationship that it has with Pakistan, though it kind of couches it in terms of objectivity, but that it is really tilted towards Pakistan, whether it is in the debates in the UN Security Council, where historically Pakistan got the support of China on a range of issues, including on issues of terrorism, designation of terrorists. So Pakistan has banked on, on China's support, and China has been unstinting in that support. So that was largely expected. And I think what we've seen happen from the Indian side, at least, given its improved relations with the US and with the Western partners, it's been able to block any specific attempts by China and Pakistan to take up Kashmir or internationalize the Kashmir question. So I think that's where it is. And my sense is on the Security Council meeting that took place, after the initial Indian attack, there has been, I think, the India was successful, I think, in making its case to the international community and to raise questions about Pakistan's relationship to the terror. So the UN Security Council session did not have any particular statement or did not call on India to do this or that. But I think as the tensions rise, as there are more rounds of blows by the two sides, the international opinion would gravitate to saying, look, there should be more efforts to tamp it down. And in fact, we had two contradictory statements from the US on Thursday night, Friday morning, where Vice President J.D. Vance said, look, we're not going to get in the middle of this conflict. It's really up to India and Pakistan to avoid escalating it to beyond a point. But Secretary of State Rubio, who is also the National Security Advisor now, he's actually called for more dialogue between India and Pakistan. So there is actually more active intervention. And I think the scale of American activism is growing. And my sense is much of the world will take similar positions if there are more rounds of violence and more escalation.
All right, Professor Mohan, I think you've partly answered my second follow-up question as well, but I think we could possibly like elaborate a little bit more. So basically, you mentioned that the world, mostly the world community, condemned the Pahalgam attack, but after like India's strikes, how effective do you think is has India's diplomatic efforts been in justifying its actions to the global community?
Yeah, my sense is I think the Indian diplomatic effort has been successful in preventing Pakistan from internationalizing the Kashmir question. But if you say, as India got, endorsement for its military actions, I mean that it has not, and I suspect India is not expecting that. That we know that in the international politics, if you can get away with use of force, you get away with. But the problem is this: that Pakistan is no pushover, and Pakistan has been responding to India's military actions. So therefore, it becomes an escalatory situation between two nuclear-armed countries, and I think that becomes a dominant element of the international thinking, which is where I think the challenge for India is how does it manage. At this point, India is making it clear that it's not going to back down. And all the steps that it has taken, that it is prepared for a long haul. Our Prime Minister has cancelled his visit to Europe that he was supposed to go early next week. He's convened a meeting of the whole government to take precautionary steps for a long haul. They've held consultations with the opposition parties, essentially saying the country should be prepared for a serious conflict.
Got it. And Professor Mohan, what are the implications for global air travel and trade, given the closure of the airspace and disruption of flights in the region?
Yeah, the air travel has already become complicated, which means airlines have to take a longer routes between India and Europe and India and North America. While India has also closed airspace for Pakistan Airlines, the traffic is not that much going out of Pakistan to the east. But for India, a large number of international airlines that operate out of India. India is a huge civil aviation market. A lot of it is directed to Europe and North America. So I think those have been affected. That's one part. So the airlines are going to pay a bigger price, and of course the price will be passed on to the consumer. Second, is the travel advisories. We've seen governments will start issuing travel advisories. Already some of them have issued, which generates a whole different level of perception globally. We've seen how the Indian Premier League cricket T20 tournament has been affected already. A couple of matches had to be cancelled, those that take place close to the Pakistan border. You have large number of foreign players who would want to go home. So the general sense of a deepening military crisis will have a wide-ranging effects and will be magnified by the travel advisories. And these could be economic, political, and in terms of commercial as well.
All right, and finally, how do you think that India's recent strikes and non-military measures like suspending the Indus Waters Treaty align with its broader strategy to exert sustained pressure on Pakistan?
Look, I think that's again is something new. That India's initial response was on diplomatic measures to scale down diplomatic relations with Pakistan. Then it has also put the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance. This issue has been debated for a long time. Now India is making it clear that it is going to mount specific pressure on the Indus Water Treaty and the arrangements that were negotiated in 1960. And more broadly, India has also sought to, constrain its economic relationship with Pakistan. But then India doesn't have much of a commercial relationship with Pakistan. Most of the trade takes place indirectly, and that too is coming under a scanner. So therefore, the initial emphasis was on diplomatic. Then we moved on to the political squeeze through the Indus Water Treaty and some economic measures. So now we've moved from that to the military domain. And I think the next few weeks, next few days, the focus will be on the military measures. We're also going to see some Indian action. I don't know they'll succeed at the International Monetary Fund, which has to approve fresh loans to Pakistan. So I think some observers say India, economic pressure is very important for India because Pakistan is far more vulnerable on the economic front than India is. So that is one argument. But then India will also lose in this economic warfare. But I think the political decision appears to have been taken that India has seen so much of terror for so many decades that it can't just stay with the old framework of one more incident, one more moment of anger, one more suspension of bilateral talks, and then going back to the old ways of doing business with Pakistan. So in some sense, there is what we say in Hindi, Arya Par. I mean, that a kind of a call for a decisive resolution of the problem that India has with Pakistan. So I think that's where this crisis is different and probably more dangerous and consequential. The question then also becomes, that's the reason why I think there will be more international involvement this time. And it also brings us to a set of questions on what could be the off-ramp measures that the international community might suggest and how they could play into the conflict dynamic between India and Pakistan. Because at some point, both of them will have to step back, and that point of how to terminate the conflict would itself become an important element of discussion globally.
Thank you so much for the insights, Prof. Mohan.
Thank you, Raghav. Thank you.
You are listening to South Asia Chat. To learn more about our work, please visit us at isas.nus.edu.sg. You can also get updates from our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.